My parents borrowed my gold credit card to make a small $5,000 online payment. That's what they said. 3 days later, my sister pulled up in a brand new car like she'd just won the lottery, and my brother rolled in on a sports bike loud enough to shake the street. I remember standing there watching them laugh like it was all some big family joke, and something inside me just snapped. I asked for my card back. They smirked and said, "Relax, it's got like $10 left." $10. As if draining me dry was nothing. But when I took the card and saw what they'd actually maxed out, I couldn't help but grin. Because the card in their hands wasn't the real one, they had no idea what they'd just exposed about themselves and what I had quietly prepared for this exact moment. My name is Zephyr Maddox, and this is the story I never thought I'd have to say out loud. Before I share it with you, I want to know you're here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story reaches. Sometimes the smallest connection is what makes a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if you've ever felt used, overlooked, or taken advantage of by the people who should have protected you, consider subscribing. You're not alone, and neither was I. The moment my phone started buzzing on my desk at the Tucson office, I knew it wasn't good news. I was supposed to be finalizing a risk report for a corporate client, but the notifications kept stacking one after another until the screen was flooded with alerts. My gold credit card had been hit with multiple online transactions, $5,000 gone in less than an hour. But instead of panic, what washed over me was something sharper, quieter, almost cold. It was confirmation of a suspicion I'd been carrying in my chest like a stone for years. 3 days earlier, my parents had called in a frantic voice claiming they needed my card for an urgent hospital bill. I remember the way their tone shifted the moment I hesitated, how it dipped into that familiar mixture of guilt and expectation. I handed over a card, yes, but it wasn't my real one. It was a secondary card linked to a decoy account I'd set up with almost nothing inside, an account I only created because deep down I needed to know the truth I'd been avoiding. And now I had it. As the charges rolled in, a different kind of notification flashed across my screen, a video from my sister Zadie's social media, showing her stepping out of a brand new car, twirling like she had just sponsored her own commercial. Minutes later, another clip, my brother Knox revving a brand new sports bike in front of our parents' house, shouting something about finally living right. Not a single mention of a hospital, not a single sign of urgency. Just celebration purchased with the card they'd sworn was for an emergency. I drove to my parents' house after work, the desert sun low behind me, and walked straight into the living room where the three of them sat laughing about nothing in particular. When I asked for my card back, they barely glanced up. My father waved a hand and said, "Relax, Zeph. There's like $10 left on it anyway." $10. As if draining me dry was a casual favor I owed them. As if the way they used me was normal. Their laughter filled the room, sharp and familiar, and something inside me settled, not anger, just clarity. I pulled my wallet from my pocket, opened it, and felt a strange, quiet satisfaction as I stared at the real gold card, still sitting safely inside. I didn't tell them. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, with their fake emergency exposed and their indifference laid bare, I knew exactly why I had prepared for this. And I finally admitted to myself that I no longer trusted the people I was raised to believe would never betray me. That moment was the doorway to every truth that followed. I didn't lose trust overnight. It eroded slowly, wearing down like sandstone in the Arizona wind. Growing up in our old town felt like living in a house built on shifting ground, my father returning from military service, aimless and restless, jumping from one get-rich-fast scheme to another, and my mother floating between emotions like they were scripts she could switch whenever responsibility got too heavy. And then there were my siblings, Zadie and Knox, drifting behind me without direction, always knowing there was someone me to catch whatever they dropped. By the time I was 15, I had become the one who kept the lights on. While other kids were playing ball or hanging out after school, I was in the back room of a tiny computer center, troubleshooting old machines for a few dollars an hour. Every paycheck went straight to overdue bills, past due notices, and threats to cut off water or power. When my parents' credit tanked, mine became the lifeline. My name ended up on every utility account, and no one asked if I understood what that meant. They just handed me the paper, told me to sign, and said things like, "You're the responsible one, Zeph," as if that was praise instead of pressure. Over time, responsibility turned into expectation, expectation into habit, and habit into obligation. My parents never said thank you, not once. My father always insisted my successes came from luck. My mother claimed any money I made was meant to be shared because family takes care of each other. But what she meant was, I take care of them. Meanwhile, any opportunity I earned became another thing they believed they deserved a piece of. I didn't realize it then, but they weren't treating me like a son, they were treating me like an extension of their survival. The first time that truth cracked open was on a night I'll never forget. I had just gotten my first real paycheck from an internship in Phoenix, and I mentioned wanting to save it for a used car. My mother looked me straight in the eye and said, "We didn't raise you so you could turn your back when the family needs you." It wasn't a plea. It was a command wrapped in guilt, a reminder of my role in their world. That was the moment something shifted inside me. I didn't say anything out loud, but privately I began to question what kind of love demanded this much sacrifice from one side only. I realized how long I had been standing alone on a tightrope they constructed. And so when they asked for my gold card weeks ago, what they thought was trust was really just me reaching the end of the rope. The disappointment I felt when the charges appeared wasn't new. It was years of exhaustion finally making sense. And that is why when I saw their faces as they laughed about the card, I didn't feel shocked. I felt the weight of every moment that had brought me here. I finally understood that what happened with the card wasn't the beginning of betrayal. It was the proof of a betrayal that had been happening all my life. 3 weeks before the $5,000 disaster, my parents called me late in the evening. Their voices softened in a way I'd come to recognize too well. They said they needed money for a medical bill, their tone hovering between urgency and rehearsed fragility. It was the same sound they used every time they needed something gentle enough to disarm, insistent enough to trap. And even though my chest tightened with suspicion, I didn't refuse them. Instead, I handed over the secondary card I'd set up with limited balance, the one tied to the decoy account. It wasn't an act of generosity. It was a quiet test, one I didn't want to need but couldn't avoid anymore. Within 48 hours, the truth began revealing itself in transaction after transaction. A down payment on a Tesla from a dealership in Phoenix. A series of transfers labeled as payments to a mechanic. Several orders from high-end boutiques I'd never even heard them mentioned before. I watched it all appear in real time, a silent spectator to the choices they made the moment they thought my guard was down. A part of me still hoped they wouldn't do exactly what they'd done, that maybe I was wrong about them. But each new charge felt like a punch, confirming everything I had feared. The following weekend, we had a family dinner at their house. My mother sat across from me wearing a new bracelet, the same one I had watched them purchase on my account. She spoke dramatically about how hard things had been lately, how the family was struggling, how she wasn't sure how much longer they could keep up with the bills. Knox chimed in, bragging about starting his garage business, a dream he'd only talked about for years but never taken a real step toward. Zadie leaned across the table, telling me to follow her new TikTok and hyping herself up like she was the star of her own show. All the while, the receipts were sitting inside my phone, contradicting every word that came out of their mouths. The real blow came the next morning when I received an alert from the bank. Someone had attempted to apply for a small credit loan using my name, my social security number, and my work information. I called the bank immediately and shut it down, and when they read back the details of who had submitted the application, the names listed were my father and Knox. Hearing their names spoken out loud by a stranger at the bank made something inside me go still. They weren't just taking advantage of the card. They were using my entire identity like it belonged to them, and if I hadn't caught it in time, my financial standing, everything I'd built, could have collapsed because of them. That night, uneasy and restless, I opened the security app connected to the cameras mounted outside my parents' house. I hadn't checked the feed in months, but something made me look. And there they were, Knox and my father, standing on the porch talking in low voices. Knox laughed and said, "If he figures it out, just say it was a system glitch. Zeph always believes whatever we tell him." My father nodded like it was the most reasonable plan in the world. Hearing them talk about me like that, so casually, so confidently, was the moment the shape of everything changed. Their actions weren't accidents, weren't desperate mistakes, weren't misunderstandings. They were deliberate choices built on the assumption that I would always forgive them, always pay, always bend. And for the first time, I knew with complete clarity that this wasn't just carelessness. It was calculated. The morning after the camera footage, I made the decision I should have made years earlier. The moment I saw the $5,000 bill maxed out, the mask finally fell away, and I couldn't pretend anymore. I sat down at my desk before sunrise and started dissecting every financial connection between me and my family. I expected a few tangled threads. What I found was an entire web of obligations, signatures, old agreements, and responsibilities I had forgotten I'd taken on. I had underestimated just how much of my life they had woven themselves into. I began with the easiest part, the accounts. I called the bank and closed the card they'd been using, classifying every charge as unauthorized. Then I went through service after service, electric, gas, water, internet, and removed my name from every account I'd been quietly paying for since I was barely an adult. Some companies were shocked that I was calling at all. Several accounts had been under my name so long the representatives assumed I lived there. I canceled the family phone plan my parents had stuck me with after graduation, and every streaming subscription tied to my name. One by one, I severed each line they had been drinking from for years. But the deeper I went, the more disturbing things I uncovered. Early that afternoon, I received an email notification about a loan application under review, another one using my identity. The timestamp showed it had been created barely an hour after I shut down the previous attempt. The bank attached the digital signature. It wasn't my father alone this time. It was him and Knox together. They weren't slowing down. They were escalating. It was as if the moment they realized the account was dying, they scrambled to siphon out whatever else they could reach. Then came the silence. Eerie, unnatural, suffocating silence. Normally, when something went wrong, when a bill bounced, when a card declined, when a service shut off, they would call me immediately. Their panic always came fast and loud. But this time, there were no calls, no texts, no accusations, not even passive-aggressive hints. Nothing. The absence of noise felt more dangerous than the noise ever had. It was the kind of quiet people make when they are planning their next move. Late that night, I started reviewing older documents, digging through digital folders I hadn't touched in years. That was when I discovered the detail that made my stomach drop. I was still listed as the cosigner on my parents' house. A document I barely remembered signing, shoved toward me when I was in my early 20s with promises that they just needed help to qualify, and that I wouldn't be responsible for anything. If they defaulted even once, the legal burden would fall entirely on me. And judging by the missed payments I saw in the statements, they were close to doing exactly that. My hands shook as I drafted the request to be removed from the mortgage. I sent the letter, attached the documents, and contacted the mortgage company directly to begin the removal process. I knew it would trigger a confrontation, but there was no other choice. The message from my mother came less than an hour later. Just one sentence, short enough to fit in a notification preview. "You're destroying this family, Zeph." No explanation, no acknowledgement, no apology for anything they had done. Just blame wrapped in the same tone I had grown up with, accusing me of the very damage they'd caused. And in that moment, reading her words on the glowing screen, I understood exactly what I was up against. They weren't going to reflect on what they had done or take responsibility. They were going to turn every consequence, every problem, every truth into something they claimed I caused. It wasn't the beginning of the conflict. It was the moment I realized the conflict had always been there. They just never expected me to finally stop playing my part. A few days passed without a single call, message, or protest from my family. The silence was unnatural, and the longer it stretched, the more it felt like a storm gathering behind shut doors. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the Tucson skyline, my phone pinged with a motion alert from my building's camera system. When I opened the feed, the sight waiting for me didn't surprise me, but it tightened something deep in my chest. My father paced anxiously on the landing. My mother wiped her eyes dramatically. Zadie angled her phone in front of her for a video, and Knox stood stiffly with his helmet in hand, jaw clenched. None of them were there to talk. They were there to corner me. My father was the first to act. He slammed his palm against my door and shouted my name like a drill sergeant reprimanding a soldier. He launched into a speech about everything he'd done for me when I was young, emphasizing over and over that I owed him more than gratitude. I stood inside, unmoving, recording every second. I didn't trust their faces, their voices, or their intentions anymore. Behind him, Zadie held up her phone, live-streaming the entire scene so her followers could witness the tragedy of a selfish son abandoning his family. The performance was flawless. Her sniffles timed her angles. Perfect, her captions no doubt already written. Then Knox stepped closer to the door. His tone was different, sharper, harder. "If you don't open this door," he said loudly enough for the neighbors to hear, "don't blame us for doing something extreme." There was no mistaking his meaning. It wasn't a plea, it was a threat. And for the first time I understood they were fully willing to cross into violence or property damage if they thought it would pressure me back into their control. While they kept pounding outside, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Dash. He dropped a link to my mother's Facebook post, a long emotional paragraph about her eldest son abandoning his sick parents and leaving his struggling siblings to fend for themselves. She had framed herself as frail my father, as injured my siblings, as helpless, and me as the villain who turned his back on his blood. My entire extended family was now chiming in, calling me heartless, ungrateful, accusing me of forgetting where I came from. Not a single person asked for my side. Outside my door, the volume rose again. My mother suddenly screamed, her voice cracking as she said, "We used your social security number for an old contract, and now you have to take responsibility for it." The hallway went quiet for a moment, as if even they realized how much they had just confessed. It hit me fully. Then they weren't just emotionally manipulative. They had crossed far into illegality, dragging my identity with them. For the first time since they arrived, I spoke. Not through the door, but through the small gap near the hinge, keeping my voice controlled. "I'm not handling anything like this," I said. "Whatever needs to be addressed will be handled through legal channels." The hallway fell still. Even through a closed door, I could feel their shock ripple outward. They'd expected pleading. They'd expected guilt. They'd expected me to fold like I always had. Instead, they were met with a boundary they never believed I could set. When their footsteps finally faded, I stayed standing behind the door long after they left, knowing that something irreparable had just broken. There was no going back now. And for the first time, I didn't want to. The next week unfolded like a dismantling of the life I thought I understood. Every morning brought a new envelope, a new alert, a new letter from a company I didn't recognize. Accounts I hadn't opened, services I hadn't signed up for, loans tied to my name in places I hadn't visited. It was as if the moment I pulled away, every secret my family had buried began surfacing at once. The more I dug, the worse it became. The first blow came from a financial institution in Nevada. A high-speed loan application under my identity had been flagged for possible fraud. They contacted me because some details didn't match specifically the handwriting and the phone number. As the representative read the application aloud, I felt my pulse climbing. My name, my social security number, my employer, my income, every piece was accurate. Every piece had been taken directly from me. The only thing that didn't belong to me were the signatures. I was one misstep away from being held liable for thousands of dollars I hadn't touched. Before I could process it, Zadie sent a message asking to meet. She said she felt guilty. She said she wanted to apologize. For a brief moment, I wondered if maybe she truly regretted what happened. But the moment she sat across from me at a coffee shop and began shifting in her seat, her rehearsed expression cracked. She admitted my father told her to reach out, hoping I'd soften if it came from her. She went further, revealing that my father and Knox were trying to find someone who could hack into my business account or obtain financial access through back channels. She said it quietly, looking down, but it didn't soften the blow. It only confirmed that nothing they'd done was accidental. It was strategy. That night, Dash sent me a voice recording. He told me he didn't want to get involved but couldn't keep quiet after hearing what he heard. The recording was of my parents talking to a relative, explaining how my income belonged to the family and how I owed them because they raised me. Hearing their voices echo through my speaker, casual and entitled, broke something inside me that I had been trying to hold together for years. It wasn't just betrayal, it was ownership. They believed I belonged to them. Trying to find some form of grounding, I reviewed my tax records and discovered another shock. My mother had filed her tax returns claiming me as a dependent for refunds. For years. Even though I had been living independently, working full-time, paying for everything myself. She had been profiting off my existence behind my back long after I moved away. Then came the final attempt, what they must have thought would pull me back in. My mother called sobbing, saying my father had been in an accident and hospitalized, that they needed me to cover the emergency bill. Her voice shook, and there was something almost impressive about how convincing she sounded. But when I hung up and called the hospital directly, they reported there was no patient under his name admitted that day. The lie didn't sting because it fooled me. It stung because they expected it to. That night I sat alone at my desk, surrounded by proof of everything they'd done. And for the first time I accepted the truth without trying to soften it. They didn't see me as a son. They saw me as a resource, a lifeline, a means to an end. The moment I stopped giving, their affection vanished. Their desperation grew teeth, and their need for control turned into something dangerous. I shut my laptop and leaned back, a strange calm settling over me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't confused. I wasn't mourning. I was done. And I knew the next step wouldn't be emotional. It would be decisive. It would be final. It would be the moment I chose myself over the family that had never truly chosen me. Once I gathered every document, screenshot, statement, and recording that proved exactly how far my family had gone, something in me finally steadied. For the first time in my life, I didn't hesitate. I didn't question whether I was being too harsh. I didn't feel the familiar pull of guilt that had controlled me for years. I organized everything into a single file and prepared it for my attorney, knowing this was the line none of us could ever cross back over. Then I moved through every corner of my digital life, cutting off the last avenues they had to reach me. I closed every authorized card tied to their names. I revoked the email access I had once given them because they claimed it made family logistics easier. I changed my mailing address with every bank and institution, tightening every bolt, shutting every door. Every subscription, every autopay, every forgotten bill I'd been covering was closed. And with every click, I felt myself reclaim something I hadn't realized I'd lost. It didn't take long for the backlash to hit. My father called first, shouting that I had betrayed the family, threatening to sue me for abandoning them. My mother followed with a message promising she would expose the truth online so everyone would know what kind of son I really was. Knox sent a recording of himself swearing he'd destroy my car if I didn't give back what belonged to the family. They weren't grieving. They were panicking because the system they'd built on top of me had finally collapsed. A few days later, Dash invited me to his wedding. He warned me that my family would be there, but I knew I had to go. Not for them. For myself. I needed to prove that I wasn't running anymore. When I walked into the venue, conversations paused. Heads turned. My family stared at me like I had shown up uninvited to a life that used to belong to all of us, but now belonged only to me. My mother blocked my path before I reached the reception hall. She demanded to know why I was ruining the family's reputation, why I was tearing everything apart. My father limped dramatically toward us, clutching his side as if the strain of my existence had physically injured him. Zadie circled us with her phone raised, filming the tension like she'd been waiting for the perfect viral moment. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply stated clearly and calmly every single thing they had done. I laid out the identity theft, the credit applications, the fake hospital emergencies, the fraudulent tax filings. I showed them the emails, the statements, the voice recordings, the camera footage. The shift in their faces was almost imperceptible at first, but then it landed the realization that they had no defense. The room around us fell silent. Dash stepped in, then speaking more firmly than I'd ever heard from him. He told them how he'd heard them talk about me, how they'd bragged about using me, how they'd planned to drag him into their schemes. His voice carried across the wedding hall, and people nearby stopped to listen. My family wasn't just cornered, they were exposed. I didn't wait for their excuses or their attempts to twist the narrative. I didn't wait for more tears or accusations. I simply looked at them and said, "From now on, whatever happens in your lives is not my responsibility." I walked away before anyone could speak. Behind me, I felt their shock harden into fear, fear of losing control, fear of losing their shield, fear of finally facing the consequences without me standing between them and reality. When I stepped outside into the cool night air, a weight I'd carried since childhood finally loosened. I felt it physically, as if every invisible chain I'd worn had fallen to the ground behind me, and I knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. Not for them, and definitely not for me. The morning after the wedding, my phone buzzed non-stop with messages from relatives who had witnessed or heard about the confrontation. Some were shocked, some were awkwardly sympathetic, most were silent, but my immediate family didn't reach out at all. Their silence wasn't peaceful, it was fearful. They finally understood that the leverage, the access, the control they'd relied on had evaporated in one night. I forwarded everything to my attorney right away. I wanted full legal protection not just for the past, but for whatever they might attempt in the future. My attorney advised me to file formal notices with the banks and credit bureaus, cutting every financial tie, and he helped me draft a legal document ending any shared liability with my parents. Within days, every signature that had once linked me to them was nullified, severed cleanly. Just when I thought I had uncovered everything, another charge surfaced: an old, forgotten credit line my mother had opened using my information years earlier. I requested immediate closure and had the account labeled as fraudulent to prevent it from ever resurfacing again. Each discovery made the picture clearer. They had never seen boundaries, only opportunities. Then came the last test. My mother messaged me saying my father was in the hospital this time, that it wasn't a lie, and they needed help with the emergency bill. The message was shorter, quieter than usual, but the tone was familiar desperation wrapped in expectation. I called the hospital myself. This time they confirmed it. He really was there. For a moment I sat with that information, letting the weight of it settle. But something had changed in me. Whether he was hurt or not didn't erase what they had done. It didn't erase the years they'd drained me dry, the way they'd used my life like a resource, the way they'd counted on my guilt to save them every time. Helping him now wouldn't be compassion. It would be surrender. I texted Dash instead. If they need emergency coverage, have the hospital build their insurance. It was the clearest boundary I had ever set, and it didn't come from anger. It came from recognition. I wasn't their safety net anymore, and I wasn't going to step back into the role they had forced on me my entire life. A year passed quietly after that. No threats, no guilt trips, no pleas for money. My life expanded in the absence of their demands. On my birthday, Dash stopped by with a small cake, handing it to me with a smile. He said, "You didn't abandon them. You were just the first one strong enough to walk away." His words settled somewhere deep inside me, in a place that had long been bruised but was finally healing. Now when I step out onto the balcony of my new place in Scottsdale, coffee in hand, the sunlight hitting the buildings around me, I feel something I never thought I'd have: peace. No vibrating phone pulling me back into chaos, no accusations, no late-night emergencies, no weight that isn't mine to carry. Freedom didn't come from hoping they would change. It came from finally realizing I could. And with that realization, the story of my old life ended quietly, firmly, and completely, as a new one began, belonging only to me. When I look back on everything I just told you, what hits me the hardest isn't the money. It isn't the $5,000 on a card that wasn't even real, or the loans they tried to take out in my name, or the bills I paid that never had my name on them. What stings the most is how long I believed I was supposed to tolerate it because it came wrapped in the word family. I grew up thinking love meant sacrifice, that being a good son meant bleeding quietly and smiling through it. I thought that if I just worked harder, gave more, forgave faster, one day, they would see me as a person and not a solution. That day never came. The only thing that finally changed was me. Walking away was not a moment of rage. It wasn't some impulsive explosion. It was a long, slow breaking that finally turned into a decision. I didn't slam the door and celebrate. I closed it gently, knowing exactly what I was losing and choosing it anyway. I chose peace over performance. I chose truth over the appearance of a perfect family. And I chose myself over a version of love that only worked if I disappeared inside of it. If you're still watching, maybe you see pieces of yourself in this. Maybe your story doesn't look exactly like mine, but you know what it's like to be the responsible one, the strong one, the one who gets called selfish the second you say no. Maybe you've had people tell you that you owe them because they raised you even while they keep taking from you in ways that leave you empty. Maybe you've been made to feel like setting boundaries is cruelty, like protecting your own life is a betrayal. If that's you, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not a villain for wanting to stop the bleeding. You are not ungrateful for wanting a life that belongs to you. I won't pretend it's easy. There are still days when the guilt creeps in, when I hear echoes of the things they used to say about me, when I wonder if I could have done something different. But then I remember the recorded calls, the forged signatures, the made-up emergencies, the entitlement in their voices when they talked about my income as if it were already theirs. I remember how small I felt when I was busy saving everyone but myself. And I remember the first quiet morning in my own place when no one needed anything. No one was demanding I fix the fire they started, and for the first time in my life, silence felt like freedom instead of danger. If you're in that space where you're starting to see the pattern, where the jokes about you being the bank or the responsible one don't feel so funny anymore, I hope my story gives you permission to question it. You are allowed to ask yourself, what about me? You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to protect your credit, your name, your money, your mental health, your future. You are allowed to stop playing a role that is slowly killing you, even if the people benefiting from it call you selfish when you try to leave. And if you're not ready yet, that's okay too. Sometimes the hardest part is simply admitting to yourself that something is wrong. Just recognizing that the way you're being treated isn't normal, that it isn't love, is already a step forward. You don't have to cut everyone off tomorrow to be brave. Sometimes bravery looks like opening a new account in your name only. Sometimes it's saying no to one small favor you would have automatically agreed to before. Sometimes it's just hearing someone else say, "This happened to me too," and letting that sink in. If my story spoke to you, I'd like to ask you for something simple. Let me know you're here. Leave a comment that says listening, or tell me where you're watching from. I don't share this to get sympathy. I share it because for a long time I thought I was alone, and I don't want anyone else trapped in that kind of isolation. When you drop a word or a city or a country in the comments, you're not just talking to me. You're signaling to everyone else who feels used and unheard that they're not alone either. And if you've ever been the one holding everything together while it felt like no one was holding you, I'd ask you to consider subscribing to this channel. This isn't just about my story, it's about people like us, the ones who were told to be strong until it broke us, the ones who are trying to rebuild from the inside out. Every time I share a story here, mine or someone else's, it's for the people who are standing at that edge wondering if they're allowed to choose themselves. I want this to be a place where those choices are seen and respected, not judged. You don't have to share details if you're not ready, but if you feel safe enough, you can tell a piece of your story in the comments. Maybe it's a sentence. Maybe it's just, "This hit home." Maybe it's, "I'm not there yet, but I want to be." Whatever it is, it matters. Because what got me through the worst parts of this wasn't some grand moment of courage. It was realizing piece by piece that I wasn't the only one who grew up being told that love meant self-destruction. So if you've ever felt like a walking safety net, like a human credit line, like the glue that keeps everyone else together while you're quietly falling apart, I hope you'll stay. Watch the next story, share your own when you're ready. Hit subscribe, not just for the algorithm, but as a small promise to yourself that you're going to keep looking for better boundaries, better stories, better versions of love. Thank you for listening to mine.